What's going on, everybody? Today, I'm gonna show you how to create levitation photos that look just like this. Let's get to it. You guys, all you need to do this photo shoot is a camera where you can set the manual exposure, a tripod, or something to hold your camera perfectly still, and that's it. If you got a cable release, that will help a little bit, but it's certainly not necessary. All right, so in order to make her look like she's floating, what we're gonna do is we're gonna take a photo of her like this, and then we're gonna take a photo with nothing there, and we're gonna remove the chair in Photoshop. In order to really make her look like she's floating, what I wanna do is get the camera down really low. In fact, I want it to be lower than the chair. So I'm gonna drop this camera down quite a bit so that it's low to the ground, so that when we remove the chair, it almost looks like we're looking up at her a little bit. So now I got the camera down low to the ground. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna focus on my subject, and then I'm gonna turn the autofocus off because I'm gonna be taking a series of photos, and I don't want the focus to change throughout the shot. So I'm gonna go ahead and focus on my subject, and then right here on the side of the lens, there's a little switch that says AF and MF. I'm gonna switch that to MF. In order for this to work, you guys, we've got to be shooting in manual exposure. So put your mode wheel on the letter M. And if you don't know anything about manual exposure, it's fine. I'm going to show you exactly how to set up your camera. We just don't want the exposure changing as we go from shot to shot. So that's why we're going to shoot in manual. Okay, so let's come here to the back of the camera and make some changes. The first thing I want to change is the ISO right here. So I'm going to press this Q button to select that, and I'll bring it over to select the ISO. I'm going to come in here, and because we're shooting in the shade, I'm going to set this to 400. If I was out in the sun, I'd probably use 100. And if it was dark or nighttime, I might go down to like 3200 or something higher like that. But again, I'm just gonna choose 400 for this situation. Next thing I wanna set is my aperture, or f-stop. Right now it's at f2.8. I want a little bit more of a deeper depth of field. So I'm gonna set that to about, let's try I'm gonna press the Q button here, come in here, and let's try like, I don't know, how about f5.6 should be a pretty good starting point. And then lastly, I just need to set my shutter speed, and I have no idea what shutter speed I should use. And so what I do here is I'll just take a photo, and I'll look at it, and that's clearly too bright. So I'm going to use a faster shutter speed. I'm gonna make this number higher. So I'm gonna start cranking this up until it looks good. And that's still just a touch bright, so I'm gonna keep going here. Let's go too far just so you can see what that looks like. Now it's clearly too dark, so when it's too dark, I'm gonna make this number lower, and we're gonna end up right about 1/500. Let's see how that looks. There you go, that looks pretty solid if I could get it to focus. There we go, that looks great. And then the only other thing I wanna set is my white balance. That's this right here. So I'm gonna press this WB button on the back of the camera, or you could just press Q and come in here and go to the white balance setting. And we also wanna get this off of auto as well. I'm shooting in the shade, so I'm gonna set mine to shade, but if it was a cloudy day, we'd use that one. If it was sunny, we'd use that one, and so on and so forth. But shade's gonna work great for this shot right here. And that's it, that's all our camera settings. We're ready to go. So another trick that I'm doing to make this look good is I'm shooting it in the shade. If we were out in the sunlight, we'd be dealing with all kinds of shadows, but by shooting in the shade, we've eliminated a lot of those shadows, and it's gonna make it a lot easier to put this all together in Photoshop. We've got our focus set, we've got our exposure set. From this point on, I'm not going to touch the camera because the last thing I want is for the camera to move at all. That's gonna make life harder. So that's why I have a cable release, so that I can take photos without touching the camera. So I'm not gonna touch the camera anymore. So I'm gonna go ahead and get my model in her pose. She's gonna get in her floating position. And what I'm really looking for here is making sure that no part of the chair is covering her up. Because remember, in the final product, we're gonna make the chair disappear. So I'm gonna have her scoot out towards me just a little bit if she can, still staying on the chair, because I'm just watching that bottom foot to make sure it's not getting covered by the chair at all. And we're gonna get her in floating position, so she's gonna hold her hands out like she's floating in her yoga Zen pose, and she looks very serious and thoughtful here. Perfect. And close your eyes and look up like you were doing. Perfect. Yep, nice, very good. Whoa, I like that, I like that. I've taken a bunch of shots because I wanna have options here. And that looks pretty great. I'm pretty happy with that first shot. Let's take some more. Now we wanna add some objects to be floating around her to give her that feel of Zen and floating and levitation. So she doesn't have to be here for this part. It doesn't matter if she is here. It is helpful if she's here so we can kind of position things around her. But if you need your model to also be the person who holds things, that's okay too. I'm fortunate I got another child over here who's gonna come over here and hold stuff to take photos. So I'm gonna leave her here, but she doesn't have to stay there, so that's fine. So hit your pose for me again. And I'm gonna have this thing right here, kind of just floating in this area. Super important is when you're holding this to have it float, kind of hold it out away from you to make it easier to cut out in Photoshop. And two, make sure that you're not covering anything up. See how my fingers are over the front of that right there? That's gonna be a problem. So when I hold this, or have my model hold it, or my subject hold it, I'm gonna have them hold it towards the back like this, being careful because it's glass, I don't want them to drop it. I just wanna make sure that I'm not covering up any part of it with my fingers like that. So come on in here, Sophie, here she comes. She's gonna hold this right here. Remember, this hand can't be here, so yeah, that's perfect. Can you just hold it just like that without dropping it? Okay, Lily, can you hold your hands up so we know where to put this? So that's about where her hands were. So maybe we'll put this over here. Come on, hold this right here, just like that, okay? Got it? You're not gonna drop it if I let go? All right, so now all I have to do is just, again, not touching the camera. I'm not even gonna look through it. I'm gonna trust that my shot is set up correctly. So if we bring that frog in just a little bit this way, perfect right there, and then up a little bit higher. And then can you turn it this way? Turn it other way, other way, other way, right there, perfect. I'm gonna just take a few shots of that. Perfect, okay, great. Let's add some more things. So next we're gonna do this letter J here, and I'm just gonna make sure, I'm gonna watch her thumb and her finger right here to make sure they're not covering up important things. I might move them back just a little bit. And then here at the bottom, I probably wanna have this tilted forward just a little bit to cover up the bottom where her finger's coming in, and you can see it down there. So we'll tilt it forward just a little bit. Lily's hand would be right about there in the photo. So I just wanna maybe put this up maybe just a little bit higher. And that's great right there. And you don't even have to be holding your pose anymore. That was just so we kind of knew where to put it. And then again, don't touch the camera. Take a few shots. Lift it up a little bit, down a little bit, tilt it a little bit. And that's perfect. Let's add one more thing. This last shot, I wanted to do a light bulb like above her head like this, but I couldn't think of a way to hold it without having your fingers in the shot. So what I did was I went and grabbed some tape, and I just globbed up some tape and I taped it to the back of the light bulb. And now you can hold onto the light bulb like that without having fingers in the shot. And if you hold it right, you won't be able to see the tape in the photograph. So Sophie, you wanna hold this right here? Now you look up, and again, remember, she doesn't need to be here. She's only here so that I know where to put her in the photo. And again, if she wasn't here, that would still be totally fine. In fact, let's do it. Come on out of the photo. Come on. So you can see the girl in the chair is not there, but the bulb is still in the right spot. So I'm just gonna take some photos. Over just a little bit, up just a little bit, down just a little bit, over this way. There you go, one of those is bound to work. Last thing, and this is super important, if you're trying to make a person look like they're floating, you gotta get a photo of nothing there. So I'm gonna take the chair, I'm gonna take everything out of the shot. Again, I'm not moving the camera, I'm not touching anything, and I'm just gonna take one last photo. Let's head inside. I'm gonna put these photos on the computer, and I'm gonna show you how to put this all together in Photoshop. So I've got my photos imported. Here are the 5 photos I'm going to use. I've got them here in Lightroom, but there are a million different ways you could get them off of your memory card and onto your computer. And all we really need to do is get them on the computer so we can go into Photoshop and come up here and go to File, Scripts, and we're gonna choose Load Files into Stack. And what this is gonna do is pop up this window right here and give us the opportunity to browse for those 5 photos. So I'm gonna do that real quick. And here are my 5 photos. I'm just gonna click and drag over all 5 of them to select them and hit Open, and then go ahead and click on OK. And what this is gonna do is it's gonna open up all 5 of my photos and put them on top of each other here in the Layers panel, which is exactly where I wanted them to be in the first place. So that's awesome. Next, I wanna find my photo of just my background. So I'm gonna turn off all my layers here with these little eyeballs until I see one with just nothing in the photo like this. And I actually want that to be at the very bottom. So that was convenient that it was already there. So I'll put that down at the bottom again. And next I want my photo of my daughter floating. So I'm gonna go with this one right here. And I want this one to be next. So I'll put that right there in my layers panel. And we're gonna stop there and just keep working up at this point. Now, what I need to do is layer mask out this chair here. So there are a million different ways you could do this. Here is how I like to do it. I'm gonna come over here in my toolbar and I'm gonna choose the Quick Selection tool. And the only part of her body that I need to get a quick selection on is anything that's touching the chair. I don't have to worry about her hands or her hair or any of that because I've got this photo behind her. And let me show you what I mean by that. So I'm gonna make this brush a little bit bigger. I'm gonna use the right bracket key to do that. Bracket keys make your brush bigger or smaller. I'm just gonna click and drag over her foot and her leg, and you can see it got way too much. That's okay. I'm gonna hold down Alt or Option on a Mac, and now I'm gonna start deselecting here. And I'm just gonna keep working on this until I got a pretty good selection around her foot and her leg. Let's zoom in a little bit here. That area right there is a little bit tough because of the shadows. I'm gonna take some time here and just clean this up by using Option to deselect, and then anytime I need to, like if that happens, I'll let go of Option and re-add to it by clicking like that. Okay, I'm pretty happy with that selection. That's looking pretty good. You'll notice I didn't bother selecting any part of her body. I could just real quickly just run the mouse over that, but again, that's gonna be super easy to fix later on, so I'm not even gonna worry about that. You can always just try. Let's just throw a layer mask on this layer now and see how it looks. This button right down here at the bottom of your layers panel, that's your layer mask button. And that doesn't look too bad. I'm not too worried again about how it cut off her arm and her hands and her head. That's gonna be super easy to fix later on. But I feel like this needs to be a little bit smoother. So I'm gonna Command Z that, and instead of just adding a layer mask, I'm gonna go into Select and Mask up here at the top of my screen. And I'm going to change my view. It's already there, but I wanna change my view to On Layers. And that's gonna let me see what it will look like once I remove the chair from the photo. So I can see I need to smooth this area out right there. So maybe smooth is gonna be my best option. I'm gonna come over here and crank the smooth up a little bit, see how that looks. Well, that looks a lot better already. That looks a lot better already. Let's try shifting the edge just a little bit. I might actually bring that out just a touch, which I rarely do. I usually bring that in, but I think that helped a little bit. And then I just want that area right there to look just a little bit better. So maybe I'll grab the Refine Edge brush tool, and this usually works better with hair and stuff like that, but let's try it here and see. Just gonna drag right along the edge of her foot. And that actually looks a touch better, but not great. Let's zoom in a little bit. What I'm gonna do then is just come in here and switch to just the regular old brush tool. And I actually wanna subtract from the selection because it's just got a little bit blurry right there. So I'm gonna just hold down the Option key and just paint over that area and try and just smooth that out just a little bit. And that looks pretty good right there. Maybe a little bit of that right there. Yep, I like it. I like it a lot. A little bit of extra there. I'm just gonna scribble over that. And let's zoom out and see how that looks. And that looks great. So let's come down and let's output this. You'll need to expand this little dude right there. So I'll click on that little triangle. I'm gonna output to, let's output to a layer mask. And we'll press OK. And you can see this gave me a layer mask on my layer. And now all I'm gonna do is make sure my layer mask is selected, press B on my keyboard to select the brush tool, use the right bracket key to make that brush nice and big. And we're just going to paint on this layer mask with the color white. So make sure white is your foreground color here. You can reset this to default by pressing D on your keyboard. And if white's not in front, press X and that will put white right there. And painting with a white brush is going to bring her head and her arms and everything back. And I don't have to worry about being careful at all unless I came down and started painting in this area, because then that's gonna bring the chair back and I don't want that. So I'm gonna Command Z that, and I'm pretty happy with the way that looks right there. Perfect. Let's go to our next layer, and I'm gonna click on this layer to select it, turn the eyeball on to activate it. And now what I need is a selection of the light bulb. And this should be a somewhat simple selection. I say that, and it probably won't be. This time I'm going to use here on the tools, I'm gonna use the Object Selection tool. By the way, you just right click on these in order to get more options here. So I'll choose the Object Selection tool, and I'm just gonna come in here and click and drag around the light bulb like that. And let's see if Photoshop can figure out what it is I want here. Look at that, that's a pretty great selection right there. I'm gonna test it by just chucking a layer mask on it. Let's see how it looks. Not bad, not bad. I think it could be a little bit better. So I'm gonna Command Z that. I'm gonna come in here into Select and Mask. And I'm just going to shift the edge in a little bit on this one just to try to get rid of that little bit of a color right there. Bring that in just a little bit, not a ton. And then what I want to try is this Decontaminate Colors. I think that's going to work really well. And look at that, that cleaned up that edge for me a lot. That looks great. But notice when you choose Decontaminate Colors, that New Layer with Layer Mask is your main option. That's okay. I'm going to just hit OK on this. And you can see that gave me a new layer, which is fine. Again, I just am gonna delete this layer just to keep things from being confusing. So I'll just click and drag that down to the garbage can. If you did a great job on cutting this out, you should be able to click and move it around. So I actually want it a little bit lower. I'm gonna put it right about there, so it's right above her head. Great, let's keep moving on. Let's go to the next layer. We'll click on it. We'll turn it on by clicking on the eyeball. We'll come over here and we'll try our Object Selection tool again. That's not bad, but it's far from perfect, right? So before I go into Selected Mask, I'm gonna switch over to the Quick Selection tool and just kind of zoom in, and I'm gonna use a much smaller brush here, so left bracket key to make my brush smaller. Hold down Alt or Option to go to deselect mode, and I'm just gonna deselect this in here, this over here, and I'm gonna let go of Alt or Option to start trying to reselect along here. And it might take a few tries to get it nice and smooth, and that's okay. Photoshop's always kind of analyzing, trying to figure out where the edge is. So sometimes you go too far, and then sometimes you go not far enough, and it just takes some time. So Okay, so I feel like I got a pretty good selection of the letter J, so I'm gonna come up here and go into select and mask, and this definitely is gonna need some cleaning up. Let's try turning on the smart radius for this one, cranking up the radius a little bit, and that should clean up that edge. Whoop, that was maybe a little too much radius. Let's bring that back down a little bit. And I definitely wanna crank up the smooth. I wanna smooth out these jagged edges, so I'll use my smooth slider to clean that up quite a bit, and that should help, but we still got some pretty rough edges that we need to figure out here. One of my favorite tricks for smoothing out straight lines is switch to the brush tool, and we're going to subtract from the selection here, so I'll choose minus up there, so that you can really see it. I'll do this on here. I'm gonna click once where I want a straight line to start, and then I'm gonna hold down Shift and click again where I want the straight line to end, and you can see how that gave me a perfectly straight line like that. So I'm gonna Command Z that, and I'm gonna come in here and I'm gonna click once, maybe right there, and hold down Shift and click again down here at the bottom, and watch how that cleaned up that edge for me. Very nice. On some of these other rougher edges, I'm gonna switch to the Refine Edge brush tool, and I try to keep the brush towards the outside of the line of the edge when I'm doing the Refine Edge brush tool, so I'm just gonna come along this rounded edge right here real carefully and just see if Photoshop can't clean that up for me. It's gonna get a little bit confused because there's some hair right there, and the Refine Edge tool seems like it's always looking for hair. So that's fine. I'll just switch back to the brush tool now, make sure I'm on minus, because I got most of it, but it just left a couple of little scratchy parts that I'm just gonna fix right there and right there where it included that hair. And this is looking pretty good. I might do a little bit more Refine Edge right here on this edge just to smooth that out a little bit. And then another one right down here on this corner. See if I can't smooth that out a little bit. And that, I might switch to the brush tool now to clean that up a little bit, but this time I'll add 2 because I feel like it took off some of the inside of it. It's not bad, but let's switch to minus. And just come in and clean that edge up just a touch. And that looks pretty good right there, pretty solid. I'm gonna shift the edge in just a touch, come down here, try a little decontaminate color, see how it looks. I like it, I think that looks good. So we'll output to a new layer with layer mask and press OK. And then again, we got one extra layer that we need to delete, so let's delete that one. And you should probably be able to do this last one on your own if you'd like to try it, or feel free to just watch along with me. Skip ahead to the end if you wanna see how we put it all together though. So I'll turn on the layer, I'll click on it, I'm gonna grab my object selection tool right over here, draw a box around the frog. I would imagine Photoshop will give me a pretty good selection of this. Heck yeah, it did. Heck yeah, pretty close. Let's just chuck a layer mask on there and see how it looks. Not bad. I might just leave that there, switch to my, make sure I have the layer mask selected, and zoom in and grab my brush tool. Ooh, let's make that much smaller. And just start painting a little bit, see if we can't clean this up, clean up this edge manually. You see I'm using a really soft edge brush there, so I'm gonna just right click, I'm gonna bring my hardness up to maybe somewhere around 85 or so %. Press return or enter to get that to close. And I probably could have gone in and done this in selected mask, but sometimes it's just a little bit easier to come in and just do this by hand. Especially if it's just as simple as that. And there you go. We've got all of our floating stuff and it's looking pretty good. So now we just got to do a couple of things to bring this image together. Let's do that. First, I'm going to start by adding some adjustment layers. Before you add adjustment layers, make sure you have the top layer selected, this very highest layer, because the adjustment layer we're about to add will always add above the selected layer. So I want to select this layer right here and then come down here, click on this, and do levels or curves, whichever one you like better for adjusting contrast and brightness or darkness. I kind of like doing curves a little bit better. I'm gonna bring up the highlights, bring down the shadows, bring up the contrast just a little bit by bringing that slider in this way a little bit, this slider in this way a little bit. There you go, that looks quite a bit better already, doesn't it? I think so. Let's do another one. I like to always add a little bit of color with hue saturation. So I'm gonna come in here and bring the saturation up a little bit. Love it, definitely looking better. Now I just wanna put some finishing touches on this. To do that, I'm gonna convert it into a smart object. So I'm gonna select all of my layers by clicking on the bottom one, holding down Shift and clicking on the very top one to select all of them. I'm gonna come up here to the top of my screen and go to Filter, Convert for Smart Filters. You'll see this pop up. That's okay, just press on OK, and you're gonna see that's gonna take all your layers and smash them down into one, but that's okay. If you ever wanted to go back in and re-edit those layers, you just double click on this, and it will open back up like this, and you'll see all your layers again. But we're not gonna do that for now. We're gonna close that, and we're gonna stay on here, and we're gonna come up here to the top of the screen and go to Filter, and we're gonna choose Camera Raw Filter. And I want this image to feel a little bit more gritty, a little bit more intense. So I'm gonna come down and I'm definitely gonna crank up the clarity, maybe even the dehaze a little bit, maybe even add a little bit of texture just to give it a little bit more of an intense feel. That did make it a little bit darker, so I'm gonna bring up the exposure a little bit right there. And I do want to add like a little bit of a soft shadow underneath her, because if she really was there, it'd be a little bit darker right there. So here's a little trick. I'm gonna come over here, I'm gonna choose my adjustment brush right there, and I'm gonna set my exposure to something dark. It doesn't matter what, just darken it down, and we're gonna come down here and we're gonna make sure our brush is very soft edge, so there's a big gap between the two lines that you see there. We could also come up here and expand this out. Just make sure our feather is on 100. You want as softest edge as possible. And then towards the very bottom of the photo, I'm just gonna paint in some darkness like that. And the cool thing is, because we did this with the adjustment brushes, we can actually adjust the intensity of it by moving this exposure slider. So we can make that just a touch darker or a touch brighter if you need to. I think right about there looks good, just so it's kind of noticeable, but not super noticeable. Let's make a few other changes. We'll come back here to our Edits tab, and we'll come down here. Let's go into color grading, and I want to give the highlights a little bit of a warmer color here for this photo, and the shadows a little bit of a cooler color. I think that looks kind of cool. And of course, last thing I want to do is come down under Effects and add a nice vignette to my photo. Not too dark, something kind of about right there. And then we'll go ahead and press OK. And look at that, here was our before adjustments and our after, and I think that looks awesome. And that's it, you guys. We just made a Levitation Composite using manual exposure in Photoshop, and I think it looks pretty awesome. Let your imaginations run wild with this. And if you create something awesome with this, let me know. Send it my way. I'd love to see it.